Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 636, Lady Bird Johnson, the podcast. For Monday, May 17th, 2021. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norton. Thanks for joining us. Well, it's Upfront season once again, and this year's podcast Upfront was filled with good news for the media. But is the news all positive? And what is all of this supposed upside evolving the category into? Tonight we'll discuss. Also answering when space-based advertising will become a real thing, whether Discord is a Facebook competitor, more bad iOS 14 news, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the Senior Communications Leader for SME, author, speaker, pundit, Mr. Christopher Barger. Christopher, welcome back.
Thank you, Bob. Great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Now, next, he's the founder and CEO of social marketing education company Social Fresh. Mr. Jason Keith joins us. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Bob. I just want to applaud you for your guest selection this evening. All Social Fresh speakers, amazing speakers that we've had.
No, all of us have spent a little time on a stage for you. That's fantastic. Now, also with us, we have the founder and principal consultant at The Red Thread and the author of a book by the same name, Ms. Tamsin Webster. Tamsin, welcome to the show.
Hello. I love you people. I'm delighted to be here.
And finally, we welcome back the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Marketing at Edison Research, Mr. Tom Webster. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Bob. I brought you some Pfizer antibodies. I made a bunch today, so I brought you some extra.
Well, thank you. I've already got plenty, but that's all right. Well, let's jump right into this. And since we're talking to Tom right away, let's talk about podcasts. We're at the close of the latest podcast Upfront, and luckily we have one of the top experts in the business of podcasting to break it all down for us, Tom Webster. What are the big takeaways from this year's event, Tom? I mean, you were there, you spoke at it. I'm not sure if you spoke at it in person or virtually. I wasn't monitoring, but it's just like you spoke at the event, you monitored the event. What's going on here?
Well, we're going to hit 1 billion by the end of this year. It's the current estimate for the podcast industry, and
hit 1 billion. What?
Just 1 billion. 1 billion antibodies. No, $1 billion in advertising revenue, which
that's
some
a large
people thought
number.
It would take a couple more years. Some people thought it should have happened already, but that's where we are.
Well, and that's the only news was money. I mean, it seems like there was a lot of things going on around there. I mean, I know you presented a lot of the latest statistics, and a lot of people were floating new statistics out there about what's going to happen with the industry. What are you seeing in the immediate future and the long-range future for the industry as a result of this event?
Yeah, one thing that's really happening in the industry right now is it's kind of starting to balkanize a bit into fiefdoms or fiefdoms. I haven't watched enough Game of Thrones to get that one right. But, podcasting started as a, open source delivered by RSS, get it in pretty much any podcast app. And now we're starting to see a lot more exclusive deals. We're starting to see Spotify, who, by the way, did not present at the IAB, lock up some people with exclusive deals. We're seeing both Apple and Spotify introduce subscription podcasting. So now when you say subscribe to my podcast, it means what most people think it means, which is pay for it. And all of this is sort of contributing to kind of breaking things up by platform a little bit more than we're used to seeing. And I think that's, people will lament that, but look, that's how video works. And if anything, podcasting, I think, still needs to catch up in terms of advertising revenue, and maybe this will be the way to do it.
Tamsin, I'd love for you to weigh in here on the evolution of podcasting, because what Tom's presenting to me sounds like the natural progression for podcasting, because that's the same route that radio took. It's the same route that TV took. I mean, it's that balkanization that he mentions where people have exclusive deals on the content. Is that good for the ecosystem? I mean, is it going to generate the kind of revenue that we hope it's going to generate, or is it just going to split up the audience too much and dissect it with so much potential bandwidth for new podcasts coming out there?
All of my opinions of these are pretty much exclusively Tom's, because he's my sole source of information on all this.
It's all we talk about.
It really is just night and day. Podcasting. Also balkanization. Fun to say. I think like with most things, one of the things that we talk about is the fact that, and to quote Tom here, we haven't reached peak book, we haven't reached peak all this other stuff. And it will find its way. I think this is part of a natural maturation process of the industry and the medium. There's always going to be people who are kind of raising their fists angrily at the man and saying oh, you're taking all the revenue. But it's were you really getting the revenue in the first place, little podcast person? But I think the pressure is just going to continue to be on, as it is with all media and all messages, which is make sure you know who you're for, make sure that your message is clear and differentiated and relevant first and foremost. That and a little bit of luck, and we'll largely see you through. But I mean, I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of times when people try to gin up outrage about this just to, gin up outrage about things. And to me, it's just a natural maturation of it all.
On the internet, people are ginning up outrage. Come on.
I know. What? It's shocking.
Well, yeah, this isn't a matter of outrage for me, but I do want to point out that is it still podcasting if it's streaming? It seems like this is becoming a streaming media event as opposed to a podcasting event.
Yeah, no. All right, you go, Tom. I know where
that train left the station, and it is what it is. We track the reach of all of the leading podcast networks in our podcast consumer tracker, and right now, the top 3 ways that people consume podcasts, and I'm not going to give these in order, are Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. 2 of those are not downloads. It is what it is. If people think they're listening to a podcast and the show itself calls itself a podcast, I don't know that anybody in the industry wants to litigate that. I mean, I think there's some rules lawyers, especially amongst the kind of OGs in the hosting business who bark a lot about this kind of thing. But ultimately, we're talking about a behavior here, not a format. Formats die. I've got a drawer full of mini discs. But it's the behavior. It's listening to compelling audio wherever and whenever you want to. And the delivery for that is changing. And that is changing in ways that are opening up the medium to brand new audiences, to younger audiences, to older audiences, to more diverse audiences.
But
so
hear me out on this. Hear me out on this. This is not an argument about whether or not it's right or wrong. It's more about, is it right? Is it wise for us to continue calling it podcasting when there's so much upside in calling it streaming audio? There's so much more value to that because there's a perception of all the streamers. You pay for Netflix, you pay for Hulu, you pay for HBO Max. And, of course you pay for podcasts because it's a streaming medium. It's not podcasting. You know what I mean? Is there any value in changing the name and potentially rebranding it as streaming media?
Well,
go ahead, Tom.
No, you go ahead, Tamsin.
Well, I'd say any value in that would be far outweighed by the damage done of the fact that you have people finally understanding and knowing what podcasting is. The majority of folks now, right, Tom? What's the number on that?
Yeah, it's 57% have listened to one, and it's almost 80% have heard the term.
Yeah, don't go changing on them now. Well, now we want you to call it this. It's like when Chevrolet was like, don't call it Chevy. that's what people call it. And I think that their understanding of how they access it will moderate over time. And this kind of like, well, it's going to be more accurate if it's streaming audio, and they're not going to pay for a quote unquote podcast. I think that's assuming a awareness of kind of details, shades of gray that the average person who's listening to a podcast, wherever it is, especially if they're listening to it on Spotify or YouTube, it's a podcast to them. And the effort that would need to be put in place to get them to change their mental definition of it, I just don't think that that's worth it.
Something that Tom said really resonates with me, because I've heard this from a bunch of different networks, which is the adoption of subscriptions. And a lot of people are starting to look at subscriptions or donations as being the primary revenue source as opposed to advertising. I know that a lot of players are looking to get both, but in reality, one's going to be dominant over the other in every scenario that you put both in play. So I'm wondering, Christopher, what's your thoughts on the future of podcasting? Is it going to continue to be an ad-supported medium? I mean, especially the mom and pop podcasts that are still using RSS, still out there trying to get some attention. Is subscription a better alternative to anybody doing this type of thing, as opposed to trying to generate ad revenue against, these big guys, the big dogs who are taking most of the money?
Well, I want to start by first saying, as the guy who was at Chevrolet when that whole kerfuffle happened, there was a lot more to it than that. Come on.
Sure. I know.
That's it. To answer your question, Bob, I for the mom and pops, I think that it makes less sense to start from if you start from a premise of wondering where your revenue is going to come from and whether it makes more sense on streaming or download or RSS, you're missing the point of creating a podcast, which is to focus on creating good content that is relevant to an audience and that people are going to want to listen to. Focus on that for mom and pop, and then adjust your marketing strategy or your distribution strategy according to what most of the audience is doing. But I would hate to see anybody start a podcast or try to grow a podcast first thinking about the revenue. Think about the content first, and then the distribution will follow. I'm not well versed enough in ad models to know which one seems to make sense, or most sense. But again, I think you start with the content. Don't worry about the revenue source until you've built up your content, and build up your audience, and it'll follow from there.
I mean, that's a really good point. And also the consideration that you can't really build an audience behind a subscription paywall if you have no audience and no conversation going on about your show. So, I mean, obviously you've got to start off out in the open before you can even begin to think about revenue of any kind. But it's an interesting...
There are...
Go ahead.
Sorry, Bob. There are a lot of people, though, that do have that portability of audience. You've seen that with Substack, where
That's true.
A lot of journalists have left and brought, they have their audience. It's through, their name or through their reputation, right? And I think you're seeing that with podcasting in some places as well. You can do podcasts on Substack and review their competitors, also launching that, which is owned by Twitter now. And you can also do that through Patreon or other sites like that. I mean, there's a lot of paid podcasts that are either taking a celebrity, pseudo-celebrity, and porting into communities like that allow them to charge for subscription, or they built up a community somewhere else and are starting to add a premium layer to it. So I think that's a significant opportunity. I don't, obviously Tom might know more, but I don't think it's the majority of the industry by any means, but I do think it's a clear trend line of something that for the creators out there and some celebrities to take advantage of.
It's super important. I mean, subscription models are super important to podcasting. We know, quarter after quarter, it's consistent that about 15% of podcast listeners say they've ever directly supported a podcast, and that ain't nothing. But still, the overwhelming source of revenue in the industry is direct response advertising, and it's what's really lagging right now. I think much more than listening to podcasts would suggest is brand advertising. Even though you do have brands like Geico that are absolutely flooding the space, there's a lot of brands that are still not treating podcasting like like it's a scale play, and it actually can be a scale play. You can reach 50% of the podcast audience by buying 5 networks, and that's within reach of a lot of brands. And right now, those dollars are still lagging.
Well, and it's a good value, huge value.
Well, something that you're both kind of talking around too is that there's a lot of different content being developed for podcasts, and I think Christopher said it best. I mean, try to get your content right first. Try to figure out what you're going to do. Try to make it as good of content as possible before you even think about revenue. But I was wondering, Tom, is there any big trends in content going on? Do you see one type of content dominating the field in terms of the presentations that were going on this week?
Yeah, I mean, what you're starting to see more and more celebrities kind of dip their toe into the waters. And there's always been, podcast celebrities, but, there's new shows being introduced from, the star of Grey's Anatomy. Seth Rogen's got a new podcast coming out. Demi Lovato's got one coming out. And they're starting to see, I think in the case of people certainly like Seth Rogen and Demi Lovato, it's also an engagement play. It's a way to build deeper relationships with their fans and a way to tell compelling stories in an outlet that they haven't really attempted yet. And you're also continuing to see a stronger ties to Hollywood. And, that was extremely clear when Amazon snapped up Wondery, which, was a tailor-made for Amazon Prime Video acquisition, because it is a heck of a lot cheaper to fully produce a compelling, brilliantly audio-designed podcast about something than one television pilot. And this is a great way to start kind of a feeder system for IP. You don't want to fund a complete TV pilot. Let's see where the podcast goes. That builds up an audience. And then you start a TV show based on that already has a built-in audience, and the concept's going to work. So I think you're going to see stronger ties that way between companies like Wondery and Amazon, and acquisitions yet to come.
That's what they did with Dirty John, right, Tom?
Yeah, Dirty John. I mean, Homecoming went that route, and you're going to start to see that more and more. And then there's the whole sort of aftermarket companion show podcast.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, by the way, if you're wondering where Maria Menounos went, she's doing pretty good. She started a company called AfterBuzz TV that specializes in companion podcasts for popular shows, and she's killing it.
And that seems to be a real trend. That's one of the trends that I saw a lot of writing about, which is the way that Hollywood extends the value of their IP, their existing TV programs, by turning around and making a podcast to keep the audience engaged and to add fuel to the fire and have it done on the cheap. I mean, a podcast, like you say, is so much less money to produce. So that makes a lot of sense. Do we see that lasting, that trend? I mean, if podcasting is going to come into its own, doesn't it need more original IP stuff that exists for the podcasting space in order to be valuable? I mean, TV can get so far with doing companion shows for the main show, but it's the main show that still drags people in and gets people excited. So isn't it the same true with podcasting?
Well, that's the beauty, I think, of podcasting. If you look at the, every quarter we publish a top 50, and if you look at those top 50 shows, they are mostly all original content to podcasting. Everything from Joe Rogan at kind of the top of that list to, Dak Shepard, Armchair Expert, just got signed by Spotify. I mean, Dak Shepard is a Hollywood actor, but he's not exactly Matt Damon, right? I mean, he's a very good podcaster. And he's a phenomenal interviewer. He's actually turned that show into an incredibly compelling and listenable show that's not necessarily just based on celebrity. There's tons of original content in that top list. So I don't think there's an original content shortage.
Well, something else that was in the news this past week that is lighting up my interest, and I hope it lights up a lot of yours, which is the space-based advertising phenomenon. Miller Brewing ran a campaign focused on launching a can of hard seltzer into space. Now, their whole focus of doing that was because they hated this hard seltzer type trend that's going on, and they wanted to emphasize the fact that they wanted to get it off the planet. And while the stunt was little more than a ruse, because they never launched anything into space, it has led to a lot of speculation about when space advertising will become more than just launching cans of hard seltzer or Teslas into the sun. So, Tamsin, obviously advertising will follow the eyeballs, and it will take actual people in space for ads to follow them there in any kind of meaningful way that's going to generate lots of revenue. But what are the interim steps? What are the interim steps we need to take in order to make this a reality as a growing market that could potentially dominate the next century?
I would like to have a fork stuck in my eye before we like truly engage with space-based advertising. I just, I'm sure I've just, maybe I've just become one of the olds. I think that clearly is what has happened. But I mean, I think actually, if you think about it in the context of where the kind of climate and environmental proclivities of particularly Gen Z and younger, I think you're going to have a lot of people start pushing back on really we've made a mess of our own planet. Do we really need to be firing all this crap into space as well? So I mean, I think that it's an interesting, of course, leave any blank space blank long enough and somebody's going to fill it with something, whether it's an ad or graffiti. But I'm really at the point where I'm just like, I know we can't stop this, but I really, really wish we could.
Obviously, junking up space is a concern. We had the same problem during the 50s, and it continues today, which is the billboards along the interstate highways. And Lady Bird Johnson started the Highway Beautification Project, and we got some of the land back, and we got some of the beauty of the natural vistas back. But the fact is, it's going to happen. I mean, I think that's the long and the short of it, Christopher, right? I mean, it's just like this is bound to happen. And what do we need to do in order to avoid what Tamsin's so scared about, so fearful of, which is that the advertising goes out of control, as it usually does in most new venues, and becomes so ubiquitous that it ruins the entire environment.
Well, and I share that fear, and something you just said, Bob, really like it usually does. If we do what we always do, to circle back to your question of what do we need to do, we need to not do what we always do. I really do agree with Tamsin that there will be a significant risk of backlash there, and brands are going to have to weigh, is it going to be more important for me to get in front of the people that are in space or capitalize on the attention that is coming with space exploration, privatized space exploration, or is it more important to avoid pissing off the other making angry the other 90% of the public who does not want to see us junk up space? So if we were going to try and be productive about this and not do what we always do, I really think it's going to come down to trying to find a way to sort of naturally and smoothly integrate the experience, the advertising or the brand visibility into the experience that people are really going to space to have. If I'm ever so fortunate that I win the lottery and I get to buy a ride on Elon Musk or Blue Origin's rides up to space, the last thing I want when I get up there is, a traditional ad blasting me in the face. However, if part of my experience becomes access to exposure to a brand in a smart way that actually helps me enjoy the experience even further, then I'm probably going to be inclined to look on that brand favorably and appreciate the role that they played in my experience. So if we look at the space opportunity as a traditional broadcast, I just want to get in front of your eyeballs, I think it will backfire on us horribly. I think it really is going to be about immersing ourselves in the experience, elevating the experience that people are there to have, and being a natural part of it in a way that makes you feel better as the customer about the brand instead of just being in front of my eyeballs.
I like how you frame that. I mean, this idea that we need to be very cautious about how we go about this, that we need to create natural flowing opportunities that don't interrupt the customer too obscenely, if you will. But that sounds like all the things we used to say about digital, about how we should do digital, and we kind of threw all those rules out and did whatever we wanted to. And I'm wondering if it's inevitable for it to become junky. It seems like we're on a path toward it just being the same old, just now we're in space.
I think marketing entropy means, yes, it will always become junky. I mean, it's just, unfortunately, I think it's human nature to some extent. I mean, how many other examples of why we can't have nice things do we need? And I love the industry that I have spent much of my life in, and I simultaneously hate it because we just mess up everything in the end.
I will say this. I mean, first of all, props for the BeanCast bingo players at home. If you had Lady Bird Johnson in the center square, you're going to make some money. But the actual brand in question here, Miller Beer, and this article, I kid you not, was written by Jeff Beer. Like, what else is this guy going to do when he's born? But write articles about beer. And Jeff Beer writes, what they're trying to do here is make some noise about the fact that they do not produce a seltzer. In other words, who they are not for. We are the beer's beer. And yes, it's going to cost as much to launch that sucker into space as it will to mine a Bitcoin. But still, I do think it's an interesting way to position themselves with an audience that probably doesn't care about junk in space. And that, beer's beer, we don't make seltzer message might just resonate with them.
But I mean, I think the association, it's one of the hardest things for the human brain to do is to not think of something, right? It's the classic, like, don't think of a pink elephant. And so I think there's actually a kind of a fundamental mistake in this approach of, like, we're going to associate ourselves with something we don't want you to associate us with. And so I think that in the grand scheme of things, I think people are going to walk away thinking that Miller has something to do with seltzer and not the opposite, because that's, I
thought it was
a lot of people are going to walk away and they're like, oh, they don't? Because I thought they wanted to get their seltzer into space. I think there's a subtlety in that campaign that I think the vast majority of the public will miss.
Well, that's true of all advertising that's a little bit too clever for its own good. I mean, people always who create ads, and I'm one of them, you think people have the attention span that you have for it if it's a long involved campaign, but people do not, and people do not follow your complicated treatise on why you don't want hard seltzer in your portfolio. I mean, that it's just a long way to go for a roast beef sandwich, as one person once told me. Jason, anything you'd like to weigh in on? I mean, I'd love for your thoughts on space advertising. I mean, it seems like there's got to be some opportunities right now that we can take advantage of, and I'm not really certain what those are. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Two things. Number one, I would love to have ads in space, not to step on anybody else's parade. I mean, I just want to be in space. So if it takes ads to get there, then let's do that. And number two, just to bring it back to Elon Musk, I think maybe we'll count how many times he gets mentioned on today's episode, but he has promised to put a Dogecoin on the moon very soon. Like, I think it's by the end of the year, next year. So that's, pretty interesting. So, I mean, having stuff in space with brands, obviously Elon's done it once and now he's doing it again, is happening. And it's just, marketers are, it's not just human nature, as Tamsin said, advertising industry as a whole, marketers as a whole, we're pretty terrible at exploiting new spaces and new technology. So I think, it's going to happen. It's going to happen pretty quickly, and it's going to be mostly stunts, PR, splashes. And I think that's fine as long as, it doesn't harm any children or animals. I think we're good.
Yeah, I look at the way the space advertising is evolving right now, and it's mainly the main players are the players who are trying to come up with the technologies to go. I mean, you've got Blue Origin and you've got SpaceX. But I think the smart player right now who kind of gives a view of what's possible in the interim before we actually get into space is probably Virgin Galactic, because Virgin is a big brand that offers lots of different services in a lot of different categories. And having Virgin Galactic is just adding to the power of the Virgin Empire. It's like Virgin Galactic doesn't need to make any money. Virgin Galactic is a big PR stunt on behalf of the Virgin brands. I mean, wouldn't you say that would be the case, Jason? And doesn't that make sense going forward?
I mean, the space race right now is three old white guys trying to do their best to extend their ego and their reputation, right? And I think Richard Branson is probably the best marketer among them. He's great at making splashes, PR splashes. He's built an entire, 200 plus companies on that system. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge benefit. I think it's going to do great wonders for the reputation of Elon Musk and Amazon and everybody that's funding this stuff. But in the interest of innovation around marketing, I think that's like the smallest piece of the story. I think it's more about if you're going to do something big, that's one of the few things that are it's kind of left to be done when it comes to these billionaires. And I think it definitely is a huge lift to all of their brands.
If Elon Musk actually puts a Dogecoin on the moon, it will instantly become the least valuable object on the moon, including moon rocks and a can of seltzer.
Well put. Well, if you haven't heard of Discord, which is a social media communications app that has been out there for some time, you're probably not a millennial or a Gen Zer, but it's a really popular program that's available on your phone. And Discord is trying to evolve into more of a community platform that allows for friends discovery, connecting with new people without the need for friend requests, without the need to actually friend someone like you do on Facebook. So, Jason, does Discord have a winning formula, or is it holding on to a pipe dream with this scenario that somehow they're going to become a social network that takes on Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, anybody saying they're going to take on Facebook today, if they're not TikTok, it's just, it's not a real concrete reality. But just as Tom was talking about, every brand needs an enemy. And I think for me, that's always a strong marketing position. But as far as the real opportunities with Discord, I mean, 140 million active monthly users, pretty huge, but still it puts them, somewhere around 9th or 10th, the most popular social platform. And it's really a competitor to Facebook groups, a subset of Facebook or Slack or Reddit. Any community platform is what we're talking about here. It's probably the best community platform out there as far as the customization, the settings, the automation opportunities. It has, live audio. I think Discord really did launch a lot of this social audio trends that we see with Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces, because it's been doing it for years. And they've done what I was not sure if they could do, which was they started as a gaming channel so gamers could talk to each other while they were playing. And it's expanded to where I think the numbers are 70% of the activity on Discord today has nothing to do with gaming. So it's a huge opportunity for brands that are willing to invest in building some type of community interaction, which is very difficult to do. It's harder to do than just broadcasting posts on Instagram or on TikTok, but it's worthwhile when you're trying to build a really loyal fan base.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate where they're coming from with this idea that you're going to connect with people and it's going to be a more genuine relationship where you're actually interacting with those people, talking to them, sharing ideas, as opposed to Facebook, which most of the interactions that go on there are just reacting to content that is being shared or content is being uploaded or content that's being falsified in often many cases. I mean, Tamsin, that's the problem, isn't it? With Discord, that's the big problem that they face, is that they don't have something to talk about. They don't have a built-in tool that's generating content that people can react to and comment on and converse about. It depends upon you bringing your own topic and you sharing and talking. I mean, it works for Clubhouse, but for how long?
Well, I mean, I think Well, my first reaction to that is that I don't think we're giving. All right. I know on one hand, I was like, you can't give any credit to the people's intelligence on this case. I'm like, well, yeah, but I mean, also never underestimate people's ability to find something to talk about. So I don't share that concern, Bob. In fact, I think in a lot of ways, Discord solves a lot of the problems of something like Clubhouse, where there's so many kind of weird hacks that people have had to adopt in order to make Clubhouse work for them. Like, there's no text back channel, and there's no this, this, that, and the other thing that I think, Discord is. It's intriguing to me. I'm really interested to Jason's point about how it has evolved from the gaming platform. But I mean, back to our, continuing theme of like, what won't marketers ruin? I mean, whenever anybody perceives there to be an audience, they absolutely will find a way to get in front of it. So I have no concerns at all that people will find ways to generate and create communities around them. I mean, and probably will continue to follow the proportions of, X amount is actually good. But I don't think people need to be fed topics. I think that that's part of what Discord's value proposition is to say, hey, if you've got something of interest, if you've got something that's valuable, if you've got something that other people are also interested in, then they will find you. And that is, I see it kind of a really interesting play on kind of long tail community building.
It's Tamsin's right. It's an extension of the oldest interaction elements on the internet. If you go back to old Usenet conversations or IRC chat rooms, it's really just an evolution of that live chatting back and forth, adding this audio element, adding a ton of modern, emojis and bots, and most of these communities are built on something that's a very defined topic, whether it's a community like Adobe has a community where people throw up their art and their creations and people dissect it and give them feedback. They're very defined communities. They're either like a fan community around a video game or an artist or a writer, or they're very defined around a topic. So I think, there's not a lack of why am I here? It's more, does this fit my need to interact with people? And so far their growth and the amount of time their users spend on Discord, which is very high, is a pretty good sign.
The challenge is going to be, Jason, you had, well, both you and Tamsin have said, brands trying to flock to Discord. The challenge that brands, I think, are going to find, because I agree with you that, people will find things to talk about and you want to give them credit for being able to interact and come up with things that are good. But brands, to take advantage of a platform like this, you're going to run into the same problem that we did with pretty much every other social community that launched before it, which is that relationships are really difficult to scale. And when you find a platform whose reason for being and whose attraction to the audience is this ability to do real-time interaction and actually go back and forth with people or a brand representative or whomever, that takes a lot more effort, frankly, than even coming up with really good one-way content.
Yeah,
so,
great point.
Brands wanting to go into Discord, you're going to have to start plugging in individual employees, letting them build individual relationships, letting them spend time there. And it doesn't lend itself to, again, what we always do. And that is the challenge we've had with literally from blogs to Facebook to Twitter to TikTok to everything else. You need to take time to scale these relationships. And that's harder to do for us than what we always do. That's why we keep, I think, falling back on it.
Yeah, I think, Chris, your point's great. I look at Reddit as an example. Brands have not really cracked Reddit. Reddit launched ads, but it took them, forever before they really, went that direction and decided to take that revenue stream. And Twitch is also the same. Twitch has ads, but Twitch and Reddit have done a really good job of taking subscription money first. And those kind of organic communities built around discussion are hard for brands to crack into at scale. It's more a play of customer service, which a lot of startups are doing on Discord, or just a play of loyalty, that 1,000 true fans, focusing on a smaller audience and really developing that true fan base in a way that a lot of startups do, and several brands that have invested in community managers do. And I think some brands will see that, some won't. And I think Discord will ultimately launch ads in some format. That they say they're not now, but just like Reddit did, that's pretty essential. The one reason they won't be competing with Facebook is because they don't have a universal feed. They don't have advertising opportunities that can help them scale. And the discoverability of those one-to-one audience connections is pretty important to a social network scale. So I think they'll be a competitor to any community platform, and I think they can get pretty big. But they're not going to produce the revenue of a Facebook and have a chance at that revenue opportunity.
I'm glad you guys moved to that point of the conversation, because that's what I wanted to bring up. I mean, this whole idea of, Facebook is successful for a reason. And the reason comes down to it's the content. Because if we believe in the Forrester Technographics ladder, and that the top 20% of any audience is going to be the creators, and the rest going down in engagement as you go down the rungs of the ladder, it seems like you hit that heavy engagement early on, but then when you try to scale it to the size of Facebook, you need something to keep the viewers happy, the ones who aren't necessarily there to post or share, but are there to stalk their friends and make sure they're up to date on the latest news. Or want to find out what's happening with the recount in Arizona. It's just like all these different needs that people progress forward, It seems like without that, you can't really scale. And I think that's what I'm hearing everybody say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely it. And I think to Christopher's point in particular, I think that is absolutely the gracious explanation for why we always end up just shouting things out, is because it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And to get content that's successful on these truly two-way platforms like this means that brands have to entrust and do something that they're just not generally wired to do, which is to allow individuals to build out and represent their brand on their own. And this, by the way, generally completely eliminates any brand or company in a regulated industry, because there's just too many hoops that they have to go through in order to be successful. But I think it's one of those, I'm always fascinated by this long-term tension between the brand of the brand and the brand of the individual, and how do you keep that in balance. But fundamentally, if brands want to be successful on platforms like Discord, they have to allow those individuals that freedom and that willingness to invest the time and the effort that it requires to build those relationships.
Yeah, I think the parallel of the easiest way for brands to get involved is going to be sports and esports, which is sponsorships, to where you don't have to own the discussion. You're creating a space for a known person or a known community to be to have some recompense for bringing you to a discussion, bringing you to a space, putting the proverbial logo on the NASCAR uniform or on the NASCAR car. In esports, it's very well known. People are accepting of it. It's accepted on Twitch. And I think it's already happening to a large degree in Discord, where there's communities that have sponsorships to have live interviews and things like that. So there's definitely opportunities there where brands don't have to reinvent any wheels, but it's not going to be anything near what Facebook is, or any type of Facebook competitor in the long run for advertising.
I'm all in on starting unregulated usage for pharmaceuticals Discord channels. Really,
that's
kind of attacking the whole regulated
babe.
industry bubble. Like, I'm imagining a room on Discord called, what else can you take this drug for? And we just sort of talk about, normal prescription drugs and what else you can take them for, and just have sort of nightly chats about that.
Wildest side effect here.
That sounds like a good plan. I have a few drugs that I take that I would love to talk about, so I'll hop right on that chat. Hey, I got one more topic I want to cover, and it's just an add-on to what we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago during the last show. I wanted to update people about iOS 14.5. Counter to early estimates of 32% opt-in for tracking, the actual number is close to 5% are opting in for any kind of tracking. Christopher, is it time to give up the premise of mobile tracking altogether? I mean, it's just like with these kind of numbers, it was already bad at 32% projected people saying we're going to go ahead and allow you to track us. But if only 5% are saying go ahead and track us, that's pretty much the death knell of mobile tracking on the iPhone, isn't it?
Well, I think the only people who are surprised by those numbers are marketers and people in the tech industry. Everybody else, I think, probably saw that coming. I don't think it's time to give up on the idea. It is if the industry is only interested in accepting tracking on terms that favor us, where we can continue to confuse relevancy with presence. Jason's expressed interest in, tennis shoes. So that or sneakers, whatever regional dialect I'm supposed to use. So therefore, if I throw an ad for sneakers on his feed, then that must mean I'm relevant. If we want to keep making that mistake, then yeah, it's probably time to give it up. If the tech industry wants to continue behaving badly with privacy and then be completely surprised when people don't trust them to engage in this kind of tracking, then yeah, it's time to give it up. If you see willingness on the part of the marketing and advertising agency to actually provide value rather than confusing relevancy with presence, and if you see the tech companies begin to walk a better walk with privacy to the point where we might trust them a little bit more with that kind of information, I think it could work. The reason I'm thinking that the numbers are going further down is just because the terms are so unfavorable to the audience.
Well, the terms are so unfavorable, and it's like I said last week. I think I went into this with an open mind because I'm very okay with advertisers tracking me. I mean, I got nothing to hide, and I get better ads as a result of it, and I'm fine with most of it. But I found myself getting those dialogue boxes and going, no, Facebook, I don't want you to have my data. And no, I don't. I mean, the only one I said yes to was Flipboard. I mean, there was only one advertiser who sent me a warning that got my vote for advertising. And if it's affecting me like that, it's got to be just monumentally awful for everybody trying to make a living in this space at this point. I mean, it's going to be killing it, right?
Well, it's a masterstroke from Apple. I mean, it positions them as the leader and king and queen of privacy. And their brand is becoming synonymous with privacy. Whether you agree with that or not, the branding around that, the awareness around that is just incredible. And I think, honestly, they positioned, if you just read the way the notifications are positioned, there's not really an argument to click yes, please track me.
No.
To ask to be tracked is not something most humans are predisposed to. So I think, this is clearly a one direction trend, and marketers are just going to learn how to produce organic content and work with influencers and create their own audiences, and third party audiences are going to be less accessible.
One last question on this, and I'm just going to ask a question I asked the rest of the panel last time we talked about this, but what's your feelings about the way that they've gone about that process of putting that notification up? I mean, are you seeing a lot of these apps have gotten the opportunity to put up a pre-screen before the notification comes up that actually explains what they're going to be using this data for? But I saw so few people taking advantage of it, and I'm just wondering, is there a chance to get that back, or once it's gone, and you're never going to get that customer back? You're never going to get that person to go into their settings and say, yeah, track me, because you've already lost them as soon as that's happened. So I'm just wondering, is there any action that people can take, or is everybody just effed at this point?
I'm curious whether or not there's something in the future that's kind of like if you've got ad block plus or something similar on your browser, because that's one of those things that I have default as on. And yet in those moments where I'm like, oh, really, I really do actually want to look at the site, and you're not going to let me pass this unless I turn my ad blocker off. I wonder if things like that will start to arise. I mean, I may be exposing my ignorance here about what isn't possible, but it always seems
Facebook is doing that.
Yeah,
with WhatsApp,
so you can
turning off. Facebook is doing that. I mean, it's not a one-to-one comparison for iOS 14.5, but Facebook is doing that with WhatsApp and saying you're going to lose access to pretty major features of WhatsApp and probably not want to use WhatsApp unless you allow us to connect your WhatsApp to Facebook, because they're unifying Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp. So I think apps could do that, and Facebook has power to do that. I don't know what the terms are for Apple in that regard, and this WhatsApp might be a test of that. But it's going to be a very special situation for people that can do that, I think, to Bob's question.
Yeah, I mean, I think to, building on Bob's point, I mean, you're right, Bob, that the human nature is not to say, yes, let me sign up for a thing that feels invasive and not awesome. But to Jason's point, it is absolutely human nature to feel and to avoid loss, the loss of something that feels valuable to you. So I think that the simplest play, if there are brands, companies, apps, websites, whatever that want to maintain the tracking, is to make it super clear what somebody loses when they don't allow tracking, because that allows at least kind of it counteracts the psychology of like, well, I don't want to be tracked, but in that moment you're like, yeah, but I actually don't want to lose this functionality that I've come to rely on.
I think if you're an app like, the Starbucks app or the Dunkin' app here in New England, I think you have an opportunity to do it right. I think you have an opportunity to create a value exchange for people, opt back into tracking, and we'll give you, 25 points a week or 100 points a month, whatever. Because there's a real value exchange in there for an app like that. I think Facebook, however, has been such a bad actor that they're really, their only real choice here is to become a better actor. And, maybe this will force them to take our privacy and our rights and the protection of our psyches a little bit more seriously, because this is the only thing we can do to bark back.
100%.
Well,
it won't. Facebook won't change.
Well, with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them each to do a shameless plug, starting with Christopher Barger. You can find him at sme.org. Tell us what's going on in your world, Christopher. What would you like to promote?
Well, sure. Thanks, Bob. And I love that we started this discussion about podcasts, because I think I need to have some offline conversations. I'm about to dip my toe in this pool for the first time. I am soon to launch a new podcast. I'm an unashamed, unapologetic pop music nerd. And I've spent a lot of time scouring about 55 years worth of the pop charts from 7 different English-speaking markets. And I'm going to launch a podcast on Fireside Chat called Friday Night Fever in June. And I will be counting down the 1,000 top pop songs of all time and doing a little bit of an homage to Casey Kasem and telling some of the stories behind the songs from each of the markets that we're talking about. And, trying to have a little bit of fun and make it interactive too. So look for it in June at FridayNightFever.online and on Fireside Chat.
That sounds a lot of fun. It sounds like you're going to have a blast doing that. So good luck. Definitely want to hear that.
Thanks.
Next up, Jason Keith. You can find him at socialfresh.com. That's the home of Social Fresh, his company that he founded and started and runs and continues to do events and educational materials about social media marketing. So tell us, what's going on in your world, Jason? What would you like to promote?
Yeah, we're still in the trailing days of a pandemic, so we're not doing our in-person conference. We're doing a virtual conference in June, and we've got Hulu and Lyft and Shopify and Google and Grand Ole Opry and a ton of great brands. If you want to know what's happening with TikTok and Reels and Clubhouse and Discord, we're talking about all those things, best practices for brands of all sizes. Check it out at socialfresh.com/2021. And Bob, we created a special coupon code. If you use BeanCast, you can save some money on your ticket. and get that taken care of to get the best deal. And check out our speakers, check out our lineup.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for doing that. And I hope the listeners out there will take advantage of the offer code and get to go see one of these events, because he puts on fantastic events, him and the team. Tamsin Webster, you can find her at tamsinwebster.com. That's the home of the Red Thread. That's the home of her content. And of course, she's got big news coming out tomorrow. I'll let you take it away, Tamsin. Tell us about what you're going to want to tell everybody about, whatever. That's a terrible tee up. Sorry, I just screwed that up entirely.
Tomorrow, May 17th, is the big day. Finally publishing my book, Find Your Red Thread, Make Your Big Ideas Irresistible. And 5 years in the making, and it is the step-by-step process that I use with my clients that range from startup founders to TED speakers to individual authors, speakers, experts on how to clarify, position, and talk about their ideas so that people find them as powerful as you yourself do.
Yeah, people talking about the book keep saying one thing that really resonates with me. It's like, because that's a problem with a lot of books. You read them and they give you big ideas but no solutions. And your book is all about the solution and all about taking them through the process that you use with your clients. I think that's a tremendous value for anybody who wants to buy the book and actually read it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it started actually because I read a book like that. I was like, well, I understand what you're saying, but how do you find a through line in a big piece of content or a big idea? And so I set about to solve that problem, and the book is the result of what I found.
Fantastic.
And Bob, just to add another endorsement there, Tamsin is I attended a workshop from her years ago. Our team did, and it was the best workshop to this day that I've ever attended. And it was on a similar topic, highly related. So if you're looking to refine your message, whether it's a presentation or write your own book or your company needs better messaging, this is the book to grab.
Thanks, Jason.
And last but not least, we have Tom Webster. You can find him at edisonresearch.com. They've just put out another edition of the Infinite Dial, which is the survey or the study that they put out every year about just podcasting, audio, all these different trends that are going on in this space. So tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, a couple quick things. At edisonresearch.com, we just released the Infinite Dial Canada, which is our third country of the year for Infinite Dial research. We are also on May 18th, so really the day after this podcast drops, putting out a brand new study and webinar on Clubhouse, really the first look at the users of Clubhouse, demographic data. It's a lot of dudes. I'll just say that. I also have a newsletter and a podcast that come out every Friday that you can find at tomwebster.media. And finally, and I'm really excited about this, I'm working on a true crime podcast called Killing Two Birds with One Lady, Lady Bird Johnson and the Highway Beautification Tragedy. It's a true crime podcast. And, we've got some great audio, really from source, great sound design, some incredible interviews from the 60s. And I can't wait for this to come out.
Oh, man, we definitely have a title. And for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it is time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, the fair, Jason. Slim Jims doubled down in Dogecoin to grow its social presence. They started tweeting about Dogecoin for some reason, and it has doubled their audience. You tell me about it, because you're the one who found this article.
Yeah, so Slim Jim, I follow all the large brands' social media very closely. Their main platform has been Instagram, which they've had the stellar strategy on Instagram of just telling people to find the hidden number 69 in their images, in their mean images for a couple years. And shockingly, it's been an amazing strategy. Check out their Instagram. It's an amazing community. It's very, teenage male oriented, as you might expect. And a lot cringy probably. So this is not a surprise. This is actually probably a step up for the Slim Jim audience, and they started tweeting about it in February. They're basically relaunching their Twitter, and have a really good copywriter on their team, on the agency that runs it for them, and they hit on Dogecoin very early. It's just one little side conversation, and saw the reaction and just tripled and quadrupled down on it. And it's really funny. I think to the effect that Slim Jim and Elon are probably the two biggest drivers of Dogecoin activity online right now. So do I recommend this for other brands? Not necessarily. If you're in the situation where you have an audience that's this closely aligned with cryptocurrency, I think it's something to look at, being involved in that conversation in some way, because there's so much energy and oxygen being taken up by these cryptocurrency discussions in social. So it's very interesting, and I think they're a great kind of leader in this capacity, and it's fun to watch.
The nexus where Slim Jim and Elon Musk meet has to have ayahuasca there. That's all I'm saying. So
I just can't wait to have Macho Man Savage showing up and going, "Step into a Dogecoin." Oh,
yeah. That's their header on Twitter. They've got Macho Man in there already.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow. Well, the fail for this week, I'm going to give to Fox News in the upfronts. Christopher, I know this is like throwing red meat to a dog, but Fox News is trying to position itself to advertisers as center-right news programming. And now they're trying to get into weather and sports and other types of things in order to make themselves more palatable. It seems like a really big ask considering what everybody knows about the network.
It is, and I'm going to try to honestly be objective and calm about this. I think they have no choice given the events of January 6th and how quickly you started to see advertisers retreat from the network. I think they have no choice but to try to do a repositioning like this. I just question whether it's going to work because, like you said, Bob, people are aware of the network. They're aware of the personalities that are there. And I don't know that any advertiser is really going to buy it.
Well, I guess it would be considered centered right if you're comparing yourself to OAN, but that's beside the point. Well, the foul for this week, Tamsin, I'm going to give the Muji. The Japanese brand, unlike everybody else in the world, every other brand in the world that is currently boycotting China as a result of what's going on with the Muslim Uyghurs and the forced labor that's going on there. And it's just like they're forcing people to pick cotton, and the cotton is going into clothing, and a lot of the clothing manufacturers have all kind of said, we're out, we're not going there. But Muji has 40% of their market in China, and they've really gone and doubled down on this idea that there's nothing wrong here, and they're advertising that way, and they've gotten a lot of credit and a lot more business in China, but it seems like an ugly way to keep yourself in business. It doesn't seem like the right thing to do.
Yeah, I don't quite understand it because that's 60% of the business that's not in China, and I wonder what proportion of that 60% has an issue with the forced labor camps in Xinjiang, right? So, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing that horribly. It's interesting because Tom and I were talking about this. It's like I hadn't been aware that Muji embraced this before I found that article, and I know, I mean, it's an N of one, I know, but it's like I was like, yeah, well, that's the end of Muji for me. Like I like this brand, but I can't support a company that supports that. And not only just isn't, I mean, they're not neutral about it. They're advertising. They're like, hey, this is where our cotton comes from. So, I mean, I know every brand has its own calculus that it has to figure out as far as like, okay, well, what's the, do they feel like they can balance out the loss of revenue from China with the rest of the country, rest of the world stepping up a little bit, or does that flip it around? I don't know. I know for one, that's the end of Muji for me, but I don't know if other people care or how many others are like me in that sense.
I think the end of Muji for me was when I walked into the store, but that's beside the point.
I would be with you, Tamsin, on principle, but I have to think that they've done audience analysis and they can anticipate where their growth is going to be. I cannot believe that
Clearly,
this was done just for.
Well, they've
geopolitics.
already
They've got to think it's a winner.
They've already declared bankruptcy in the U.S. So I mean, it's just like this is not a brand concern for them anymore, is what we think. So
well, this is a lack
sponsor
of
Fox News now.
It's a lack of Western influence in Asia, really. I mean, they don't. All their growth is in China. They're a Japanese company. They don't have a Western growth plan. They have a Chinese growth plan. That's the whole story.
Well, very cynically, it's probably not a horrible strategy if that's the only concern you have is growth. If you want to if you want to have to answer to anybody someday, then it's probably not good. But
I agree.
Yeah, good points. But, well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag #FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly.
I'm just gaga for Dogecoin.
It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.